So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you. And it's also a great pleasure to introduce the panelists, Raffaella Tenconi from the EDA Economics from London, Stephen Ezell from Information Technology and Innovation Funds, ITIF from Washington, and Professor Johannes Glueckler from Universität Heidelberg. But he's now moving to Ludwig Maximilian Universität to Munich, so I would say rather from Munich University. So see the scene, it's a little bit similar like in an arena for the bullfight. There is also a place for the sombra, that means the shed where we are now, and also for the people sitting in the sol, that means the sunshine. But I do think that you can enjoy this discussion today. Our title is today Innovation, Creativity and Happiness in a Digital Age. And I would start rather the question with happiness in this whole issue. And later on we will go deeper what also Dorka said. So I do think that the brilliant technologies what we are using, it has one positive side. They are time-saving. So all these innovation technologies which we use save us time. And having more time certainly at our disposal maybe make us happy. How we use the time, but we have more, that is also a question. My question is rather in that case that how is it developing in a digital age? So when, for example, there is also a part in the economics so-called attention economies. This means that big tech companies or algorithms are fighting our attention. Sometimes our attention is just a few seconds and so on. So my question is to our panelists at the very beginning, happiness, time-saving technologies, how they are developing in the digital age. Make us happy, more happy.
I guess I'm starting because I'm the guilty one of the title of bringing the happiness issue in this very serious economist panel. So my answer is going to have a few layers. The first one is let's get straight the fact that there is a World Happiness Report. It's the 10th year. It's done by really good economists. So this is real science. And by the way, you can also look up Hungary, 51st in the ranking out of almost 140. So it's a genuine branch of economics. The reason why it's important, I mean, when you look at the data approach, is that people that, in order to be happy, they want, of course, some degree of wealth. They want some kind of ability, a freedom of action and express themselves. They want health. And then they want other stuff that, then each one to its own. From my perspective, the reason why happiness was important and interesting as a thing, it's because when I became an entrepreneur almost 8 years ago, I was really intrigued by how people made choices. And it turns out that we all really need to be, to some degree, aspire to be happy. Ideally, to be happy, to make good decisions. Financial decisions, actions decision, you actually need to be happy. If you are, think about it, if you are severely stressed or if you're depressed, inaction becomes the thing. Right? And inaction actually has an enormous cost. It has a health cost, a social cost, a financial cost. So it turns out that happiness, it really is a thing, and it is very important from an economic perspective. Now, you asked the link about happiness and digital and the freedom of time. I think the digital technology has three aspects. The first one is extremely data intensive. It's very fast, it changes continuously, it improves continuously, and it has huge scale. in a way that I don't think we've really witnesses anything, because all parts of our lives are changed. It's not just your job and your phone, but it is your ability to know things. It's how much of your attention is driven by all of these new digital tools. So to me, the most important message to convey is it's a technology that is super flexible, it's super powerful, and the data part of it is perhaps the most important for the people, because it takes a lot of energy for you to process stuff, and you have to. Biologically, you need to take decisions all the time, right? So the more things are thrown at you, even if 99% of them is garbage, your mind still need to process it. So it's energy intensive. It uses data in a way that, to be honest, if you're not an economist or if you're not a financial professional, you're just not quite as comfortable as seeing the world in that prism. And so that also creates an issue of trust and interpretability. I think that is very important. And the third thing that is very close to my heart is that you silo information more easily in a digital world, right? I mean, everybody knows about the Twitter and how you can be in the loop of people that think of you. So you need to have new skills on how to handle data. And part of these skills is also to avoid that you go into a negative spiral. I mean, I don't know if any of you have seen the statistics of how many young people get harassed online, how easy it is to really lose your happiness, lose your balance. And then it's a tremendous cost to your life. So I think it's a very good leap. We have to live with it, and it needs new skills.
So you're going to ask an American about happiness when the average American works 500 hours more a year than the average German. I think that's a interesting perspective on how we're using our time differently. But I think, the way I come down on this comes back to that really wonderful dialogue in Shakespeare's Hamlet, when Hamlet is speaking with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And he says, there is nothing either good or bad, but it's the thinking that makes it so. And I think the exact same thing applies with technology. So technology can be used, once we learn how to split the atom, for peaceful purposes like low-cost energy, or to annihilate one another. We can use tools in biotechnology like gene editing, either to cure childhood leukemia in babies, or to make the viruses more lethal and more transmissible, right? And the same thing when it comes to digital technology. We can use technology to mark ourselves as safe after an earthquake, or we can use it to impose oppressive regimes of control, like in China with the social credit score. So, technology itself is inherently valueless. And so what matters is how we as a society decide to judiciously use these technologies for the benefit of humankind, right? And so when it comes to digital technology then, I think clearly it's probably a double-edged sword. We can certainly point to cases. We look at the impact of excessive addiction of social media use among young women, and I think the data very clearly shows that that's correlated with unhappiness among young teenage women in some cases. But at the same time, digital technologies enable us to talk to therapists online. If we hadn't had teleconferencing and Zooms during the pandemic, I think we would be tremendously more unhappy as a society because we're social creatures. So technology and digital technology cuts both ways. And to your point, I think, Raffaella, it's about how we empower individuals to use digital technologies productively in their lives to enable a sense of agency and self-control. And then just the last point there was a study done recently in the US that found Americans would give up a quarter of the earnings they can make in their lifetime as long as they're doing meaningful work. And to the extent digital technologies enable us to pursue meaningful work, whether if you like to drive, you're doing Uber, or if you like to set up a small business on Etsy, you can sell your crafts to the rest of the world. Using these technologies in a purposeful way to make us more happy, I think, is a real opportunity.
All right, many smart things. I'd like to give an example. Being a geographer, there is an interest in orientation in space. And many of us will use Google Maps to get to different places. So just imagine you take your car and you want to travel to Rome, a city where we know that it's very easy to handle with a car, with a very orderly traffic. Nobody would do that without Google Maps. But yes, we would all do it with Google Maps. That's great. So digital technology enhances our lives, and that's just one example.
I tell you, if you took back the map and said,
let me just finish that point. But there is a counter side to this, and that's why I'm choosing the example. When you then ask somebody to switch off their smartphones and show the direction of north or south, or where a certain area of a city is, then you see that we lose orientational competence in our cognitions. So technology takes over some sort of competences that we used to have before. So here we are with a new discussion. What about tablets and digital text writing in school rather than learning handwriting? What is the relationship between handwriting and the development of our own intellectual cognitive capacity? So I think it's as you said, it's a double-edged sword. I would say there's a paradoxical relationship in that. But coming back to happiness, everybody of you will certainly know what the average screen time is on a daily basis. And I've seen that from my children, and it can easily be 5 hours a day. And I really wonder whether those 5 hours of active time during a day were spent happily. Happiness, as economists usually study it, is, I don't know whether there's a reflection about whether happiness is a social phenomenon. You can ask everyone individually whether they're happy on a scale from 0 to 10 or from whatever, and they will give a response, so you can measure happiness individually. But I think happiness is a real function of our social environment. We feel happier when others feel happier too. We feel happier if we are not confronted with bad destinies around us. So it's also a question about where are we going as societies, while technology is leading us to increasing individualization of the consumption of content. Just a question.
Just to the 5 hours. I read just on a small article written in the 1930 something, and at that time the technology was the radio, and the parents complained that the children are listening more than 5 hours to radio crimies. Yeah? Maybe the parent would be more satisfied when the children listen to radio and so on instead of computer. But I think that in this case the technology repeats itself, and all this question comes as a new that how can we use our free time. Sorry.
So, in 1847, the Leicester Mercury, a newspaper in England, warned against the easy distribution of novels across the country, warning that the multitude of books is a great evil and is poisoning the mind of the young child of the British. But yes, your point is that we've been through periods with the printed media, with recorded sound, with visual arts and film, where these have been disruptive generative technologies of television that a multitude of forces, often established incumbents, have kind of pushed back and extolled the ills of these technologies. I think, but once society comes more to understand them, more to use them in a productive way. This is why you pointed out to the tech panic cycle of rising doom that we get used to it and fears subside.
Could I stir some controversy and say that yes, it's true that all previous technologies are always looking weird, especially to, sorry guys, but oldies like us, okay? But there are two important changes. First of all, the economy is evolving over time, and we're more and more a service economy, a service society. And in services, the human interaction, actually, and the human experience becomes really important, right? Whereas when you were just manufacturing stuff, actually, education that is very rigid, and you just do your stuff, and it doesn't matter how you feel, you just do it on the field. At that point, how you feel is not as important as long as your hands do stuff. Where I think it's something really powerful now that we just cannot overlook economically and human the well-being of people. And well-being is really a combination of three things: your mind, your emotions, and your body. Your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, and your rational well-being. So I think it's undeniable that exposure, especially at a young age, and especially with people that do not have a proper approach to all of this digital stuff, undermines their well-being. And not because the technology is doing it, but because, look, I'm a mother, I do, or I try not to, but obviously the easiest thing to do when you're a working mother is to give YouTube to your children, right? You both are curing an illness that you're not trying to face, or that you cannot face because you're two in the bottom income. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, there are better approaches to handle the technology, but I think we're nowhere close to really have the sufficiently sophisticated public discussion how to handle it productively, and we risk that we have generations of young people seriously scarred by it.
Well, and I would say it's not only young people. A recent survey found that 1 in 3 Americans had only limited digital skills, and that 1 in 6 working-age American adults can barely use email, web search, or database tools. So I think this issue of digital literacy becomes a vital imperative for public policymakers in developed and developing countries alike. Because if we are going to have this massive digital economic transformation, we have to be absolutely, attuned that no one's left behind, that we do our best to empower and equip all citizens to be able to take advantage of the digital revolution.
Yeah, I do agree with that certainly digital literacy is very important. Otherwise, you can't be happy in the digital age when there are happiness in digital age. May I turn to a little bit different topic from happiness to the worries? So just when you look back to the last decade, there was a lot of talk about, the robots are coming to steal our jobs or take away our jobs. Now, when you just consider what happened in the last decade, it didn't happen. Yeah? And currently we have also a discussion that, there is a new technology, AI, and etc., and now AI will take away our jobs. But one point is, or one conclusion of the discussion of the last decade, I think is very important. And the conclusion was, the robots are coming, one point, but there will be always 2 tasks what will be always remain for humans. And those tasks needs social intelligence and creative intelligence. So that is what remains at the end of the day for us. And my question is in that case, how can Matthias Corvinus Collegium, by definition, is a talent development institution. So how can we help the young to have later on jobs which is robot-proof or future-proof? How can we enhance creativity? Anyway, what to do with the creativity? And I just look at the audience, and may I quote one question of you, Marty. You wrote, how can communities and people maintain or even increase their creativity at a time when ChatGPT and AI can generate many ideas and solutions to various problems? So,
maybe I start off. An educational scholar, very well known, Ken Robinson, he had several TED Talks online. He said, the educational system that you're using in Hungary, he didn't say that, he meant every educational system, the Italian, the German, the US one, they are designed to destroy creativity. So when you psychologically assess the creativity of a 5-year-old born, they are enormously creative. They recombine, they use their imagination to try to respond to some sort of problem and come up with a solution. But our educational system prioritizes certain fields of knowledge that are used in the economy, and you are learned not to pursue certain paths that you are sociologically trained not to do because they're not normatively allowed. So we all learn to align, and we leave university as strongly aligned individuals. That's a very provocative stance. Of course, this is not the true story to it. But if you find some truth in that, you would have to think generally about, how could an educational or a university system be organized in order to sustain or to make understand that whatever you learn in university, maybe most of it, will never be useful. But the way to get there will be continuously useful to get somewhere else in the future. The discussion about robots taking away our jobs is an ill-fated discussion because it projects the future of robots into the presence of the division of labor. But the division of labor is changing so rapidly and continuously. Jobs are created that didn't exist 10 years ago. So I think that is some sort of fear that is really unsubstantiated. And maybe the final point to have an immediate response is within the discussions, innovation studies, and economics, there is a simple rule saying, well, robots can take over the routine jobs, whereas humans should concentrate on the non-routine jobs. I would think that the advances of artificial intelligence and new technologies are moving that boundary between routine and non-routine further to a smaller, narrower window of non-routine jobs. But this is certainly where we will have to be in order to have satisfying and happiness-increasing employment.
I would say, first of all, on the robots coming to take our jobs, I think this is really not the right way of framing the question. So the robots, or rather digital technology, of which artificial intelligence is a very important piece. It's an enabling technology for the green transition, the energy transition, nearshoring. Of course, also the digital transition in itself. So we're actually doing 4 incredibly complex and very labor-intensive transitions, and we're just at the beginning. So I think actually we're going to have an explosion of employment, and you will all have to bid up your wages quite aggressively anyway, because this is a structural shortage of labor. So maybe in 30 years, we will have been advancing enough on these 4 things that, okay, robots may take over a little bit more, but in 30 years, institutions will have evolved. So you cannot forecast that far because too many of the key parameters would have changed in a way that you cannot forecast. So I think if you're afraid of losing your jobs to a robot, that's not right. But what I think, and to your question on how do you keep creativity, my perception is, the first rule is you actually need to know stuff, okay? Real stuff. Not just ask ChatGPT what they think about the French Revolution. You need to have done the work, okay? It's hard. It's time consuming. That's why you do it when you're young, because you still have the energies. So that's the first step. And then the second step, you need to handle your well-being if you want to be successful through the life cycle, because the life cycle has patterns, and there will be times when you are at most and you want to work 15 hours a day on a short day, and there will be times when you're sick, or your mom is sick, or your kids are sick, or your husband is sick, and you just cannot do it. And there'll be times when you have your energies again. So you need to manage yourself and your finances and continuously build your knowledge, and then you'll be robot-proof. But then you'll also be creative, because the more you know and the more energy you have, the more curious you are.
Mother Jones magazine, which is a leftist progressive magazine in America, wrote the other day that, yeah, the robots, they're probably going to decide not to kill us all, but they'll certainly be taking our jobs, and faster than anyone expects. And I know you'll have Martin Ford here tomorrow, from author, New York Times bestseller, who wrote The Rise of the Robots, where he helpfully counseled Western policymakers to expect 75% unemployment in Western nations by the year 2100. Now, in our view, that is a wildly fallacious misreading of the technology and the economy. What it does is fall prey to the fallacy, the lump of labor fallacy, which assumes that there is a fixed number of jobs to be done in an economy, and when automation or technology replaces a job, that no other job comes into being. And what that misses, as most observers do, is the second order effects from technological change. More automation creates more demand, which leads to more consumption, which leads to more jobs in other sectors. So if we can make a BMW for half the cost, then we either double consumption of BMWs, or we let you buy their things, like travel or more forms of education. But I think there's a wonderful book by these guys, James Wilson and Paul Dougherty, called Human and Machine: Reimagining Work in the Age of AI. And what they say is yes, there are going to be a set of jobs where AI and machines are just fundamentally better than humans, doing things like calculating, transacting, predicting, iterating. As you said, Sultan, there'll be jobs or tasks where humans are better at leading, discerning, emphasizing, judging. But then they say there's this middle, where humans and machines are going to give each other superpowers. So there'll be jobs for people in training, sustaining, and explaining AI systems, right? AI trainers, explaining the output of these systems. And they're going to be a set of activities where where the machines empower people at activities like amplifying, extending, embodying, interacting. And so a great example, I think, comes from BMW. So this is from Marcus Schaefer. He's the head of production planning. He said that at BMW, we've determined in the automated factory that we're about 85% more productive when the machines and humans are working together, when either of them are working alone. At BMW, we have been taking machines off the line and putting people back on it, because we can produce many more high-value added products. The variety is too much for the machines to take on. So I think the point is empowering people to be able to use these technologies in their jobs, in their tasks, and that's the way forward. Now, from an education perspective, love what you said. I'd also say, with regard to innovation and ideation, there's such a wonderful knowledge out there today. Books like The 10 Types of Innovation by Larry Keeley, books like The Invincible Company or The Value Proposition Canvas by Osterwald and Pigneur. These teach ideation and creativity skills in a formalized way, and I'd commend those to any education system in the world.
So, thank you very much. And just to come back what Raffaella said, okay? Yeah, when you would like to be creative, you have to be very good in one certain things. Yeah? It is not just that the creativity just comes from the blue sky and there is there. And when I was listening just to you, when you said that, all education system or universities, okay, are destroying creativity, I do hope that the Matthias Communist Collegium is to nurture creativity and to enhance creativity. It's not so easy, and not too easy to explain, sorry, to the students, that for the creativity you have to be really very, very good in some topics, and after that we can maybe help you to nurture the creativity. And I don't fully agree with all issues, but what's happening with the jobs and so on. My best example is always when you look back just to 2007, July 28 anyway, when the first iPhone was introduced. And 1 year later was the iTunes introduced with all the apps and the possibilities to apps. Yeah? So when you ask someone just in July, just in 1 year, 2007, oh, what is your dream job? No one would say, I would be an app developer. And currently there are more than 9 million applications. Yeah? It's a huge branch of economy.
And 1.2 million Americans developing apps as their job.
2 million Americans are working there. So that 2 million American new jobs was created by a gadget. Yeah? But beforehand, there was no imagination, oh, I would be app developer, because it didn't exist at that time.
I would like to comment on the idea of creativity, because you had a very concrete question about what could MCC do. Creativity is very close to deviance. creativity is the result of unconventional recombinations of what humanity knows. So other than emphasizing studying hard, reading everything, it's about thinking through these things, reading different things, and coming up usually with unconventional combinations. That is what makes other people recognize a solution as creative. The problem about unconventionality is that very easily creative propositions meet controversy. So what you need is you need social contexts of tolerance. You need social contexts in which the stigma of failure does not exist, where you can propose and experiment and demonstrate and fail and still be part of the loop of a movement in search for solutions. And that is something I would say that traditional European societies, Germany, the country I come from, are really lacking in. Entrepreneurship is a shrinking phenomenon in Germany. People are no longer risk-taking. If they take risks, it's not rewarded in society other than that it is really a success. But how often are creative propositions successes? Certainly not in the majority of the contexts. So that for a university, there are really two things. One thing is some people are more willing to take deviant lines of thinking, attract those as a university. And how do you attract them? It's because you create an ecosystem in which different thinking can flourish. I think that's so values of openness are critically important.
Just one word to the ecosystem. So the creativity need an ecosystem. We often use the word thinking outside the box. But when you consider what does it mean thinking outside the box, it means thinking between the boxes. Yeah? We are all thinking in our boxes. Yeah? And what we are doing currently, no, we are thinking between the boxes, between all boxes. And I think this kind of ecosystem, when we have discussion between the boxes, thinking between the boxes, it could enhance the creativity. Just to think in your box, and it sounds very lovely thinking outside the box, but outside the box is rather discussion, conversation, and having different boxes and how they can discuss. Sorry.
No. I think both points are really, really valid. I would say it's not just that people are a little devious; they're also stubborn. You know, they have a vision that nobody else sees, or they have a problem, and they have to pursue it no matter what it means. So I think the other issue is that if you have people that have different backgrounds, whether that is gender, social condition, different nationalities, they will bring in different problems. And then as you share the knowledge and the experience and with the rigorousness of the thing, then that's where you get a lot of creativity. But I think there is also a financial aspect to it. I mean, the truth is that, especially in Europe, particularly in the last 15 years, we have concentrated financial gains in the better part of the income distribution of the corporate sector. So it doesn't pay as much to be a small entrepreneur, because at the beginning you're going to fail, right? I mean, it's not that, by year 3 I definitely get the idea. No, maybe it's 3 years and 6 months. So I think we also have to be honest in the fact that to be more creative is also going to come with thinking a bit about industrial policy and pension structure, I'd say.
I would just add that, Steve Jobs famously said that Apple innovated at the intersection of technology and humanities. And that's why exposure, as I think the students at MCC get, to visual arts, design, drama, dance, music is so important to kind of unleash that creative side as well. I'd also say, from what I see, I think you're doing something much better than American universities are, which is exposing your students to the entire milieu of ideas, even if challenging, which they might confront. Too often, in my view, U.S. universities have safe spaces where triggering ideas can permit you not to deal with challenging or discomforting facts. And to be a leader in society, to be a steward, and to be creative requires confronting those things. I'll also just add, a recent LinkedIn report surveyed what U.S. employers are looking for, and they found that U.S. employers value soft skills over hard ones, and that the 3 most important ones they valued were creativity, collaboration, and persuasive capacity.
May I just broaden a little bit the perspective what we are discussing here, because I think there are two basic perspectives of the technologies, how they are developing. One is the race against the machine. We compete with the machine. Yeah? And the other is rather rise with the machine. So machines are our servants, and we can use machine and we can rise together. So just to come back to what you mentioned in the maps and GPS and so on, Joe McCarthy said that he's one of the founders of the artificial intelligence. He said when it works, we doesn't call anymore artificial intelligence. So when it works, all the mystery is over. So that, what do you think when the technology is spreading, will solve everything? Will we solve this question, discussion, rise with the machine or race against the machine? And what do you think, which position is more helpful to be more happy? Which is more helpful for the economy, for the creativity?
I think rising with the machine, undoubtedly. Rising with the machine, though, also means, first of all, let's clarify the time lags, because you innovate, so you created something, so we had ChatGPT recently, but then the penetration through the economy is a long process, right? I mean, you need to develop the apps, you need to learn the stuff. I mean, I think we barely beginning to know how to use the cloud, which is probably the easier one of all of them. So, I mean, we're talking about a decade minimum to just kind of get the gist of all of the aspects. I think two decades easily before we really handle the technology. So it's rising with the machines with this little tweak that digital is really fast, but the adoption is really slow. So I think the art may be for us to understand how to pace the evolution.
I'm certainly of the side of rise with the machines, work with machines, use machines and technology and AI and machine learning to empower your individual work, the output of your organizations. And there's a recent study done by OpenAI that found that generative AI will affect 80% of employers in the context of 10% of their task. So we're all going to be affected. We're all going to have to know how to use these tools, but it's not going to displace our job entirely. It's one other point. Accenture did a big AI study a couple weeks back, and they surveyed 1,200 global C-level executives. And they asked, how ready is your workforce? And only a quarter said they felt their workforce was ready for AI adoption. But when they surveyed the workers at those companies, 2/3 of skilled workers and half of lesser skilled workers said they were really enthusiastic about the potential of AI to empower their jobs, help them add value to the organization. So there's a real disconnect at the C-level in management about this. At the same time, only 3% of those companies said they were going to increase any investments in digital training for their workforce. So I think we have a lot to do with management of companies to understand that they have a responsibility to enable their people to use these tools, and that they're willing to do so and not fearful of them.
Can I actually give an example of exactly what you said? Because so we tested ChatGPT. So I run forecasts for a living, right? So my staff was making models using ChatGPT intentionally and making models that we already know how to do, so we could cross-compare. And so their reaction was super enthusiastic. They were very happy because all of a sudden they had like a senior economist next to them that they could ask everything, and they weren't embarrassed, right? Because there's always that kind of friction when top and bottom. So they were super, super excited, and the result was good but not outstanding, right? And my response is, this is interesting. By all means, it was faster in the execution. But who cross-checks the machine? I mean, because for modeling, for us, it was relatively easy, right? We know all of the models and we can spot it like that. But if you're writing something that is a research of information, you need to still cross-check the reference that the machine brought up. And that takes time. So ultimately, it's not so much of a time saving. And legally, as a business, what kind of legal risk am I facing by using this? So I think there is some justification in the change in the enthusiasm, because you don't know what is the legal perimeter. You kind of hope that if the machine did it, then it's not your fault, but you bought the machine. So, I mean, to me, it's not obvious, right?
So on a discussion panel, you would expect at least one to take the other position, race against. I cannot. I'm also on the side of rise with a machine, but I would like to remind us of the differences that there exist. Just remember three concepts: the robot, the android, and the cyborg. And there is an interesting discussion in there. So when I look at Zoltán, he's definitely a cyborg, because he has a pair of glasses on his head that he's using to have a better view of what's going on. I have one here. I could be a cyborg in a second. So a cyborg is a combined system of organic and inorganic elements. And we have improved our quality of lives through that. We're using headphones, we're using all kinds of machines, virtual glasses in the future. So I think that is a proof of improvement. But then we have this delicate distinction between androids and robots. Robots are machines. We would never dub them names. We would not see them as participants of a social context. They would just perform predetermined tasks as a machine. But if we as a society begin to have machines take part in our social lives as social others, to substitute, for example, a certain relationship. I'm thinking of elderly care, where an android looks like a human, but is a machine. It's an inorganic system, but it performs social interaction. It attracts the attention of a person. It engages in conversations. Then that is something that I think deserves more discussion. Like, where do we draw the boundary in the social for the future?
So that when I just translate into myself, that in that case, that companies and people should learn how to use the new technology reasonable, more or less. That was in that case. But when you look at just what is happening right now in Hungary, but in the whole world, there is a huge hype about ChatGPT, about the artificial intelligence, about the new technologies. And on the other hand, when you really read this news and so on, there are also a lot of talk about we should regulate it as soon as possible. It is harmful for the future. So I think it is a medallion with both sides. One is the hype, that we expect maybe too much, and on the other hand, there is a panic. So we fear that take away the jobs, what will happen with that, and all these. So and when you look back, different technology, it's always happened. We have hype and a panic at the same time. And after that, the people learn how to use it. Maybe we have less panic and less hype. Is the current technological change is different from this? Is something quite new that maybe the panic was some basis or not? And the second is, what do you think, which is better from regulatory point of view? Because everybody think, okay, I read just in Italy with the ChatGPT, it should be abolished immediately after 2 weeks or something. It discussed also in Hungary. Or maybe it's better when we just sit back and wait and see what will happen.
Okay. Can I go first here? Because I want to say I think Europe's in real trouble. If you look at the level of venture capital into European startups over the past years, it's declined by more than half, from $106 billion to $53 billion. Our organization's assessment of the upcoming European AI Act estimates that it will cost the European economy $36 billion over the next 5 years, and it will reduce the profits by up to 40% of any European company with a $10 million turnover that employs what the AI Act would deem to be a high-risk technology. If you look at the number of AI startups, the US has had 542 AI startups in 2022. Europe, a fraction of that, a fraction of the investment. So, Historically, in our view, European regulators have tended to adopt what we call the precautionary principle, the notion that the innovator has to prove to the regulator that the technology or business model they're introducing won't cause harm to society. While in America, we've adopted more of the innovation principle, the notion that it is incumbent upon the regulator to document and demonstrate the harm of the new technology. So I guess I would just say why we would encourage European regulators to focus on real and not imagined harms from AI.
Just one sentence. It's not too easy to urge them.
Well, I'm going to take more of a European stance here. I think there is an objective, at least two areas that really are very clear question marks. I mean, one on copyright and one on fraud. I mean, myself being Italian, of course, that's my first thinking. You know, how many things are you going to steal with this technology? You know, it's a very present problem. So I think it's a matter of updating the current legal principles to adapt to the technology. But it's absolutely true that the technology develops very fast and we are very behind. So I think that there is a thing that we don't want to talk about, that we need to invest an enormous amount on human capital to keep up with the technology. You know, we're doing QE left, right, and center. But where is the extra money for the national statistics? Where is the extra money to make sure that the departments, you know, talk to each other? Because I was thinking about it. You know, you have climate change, and we're going to have data that tells me where the river level is and the weather forecast. But are these people talking to each other? No, because there's no money to actually make that happen. I mean, are we making actually the extra kindergarten and all of the extra stuff that women need so that they can go to work and so that, you know, they can actually contribute to all of the employment that we need? No. So I think maybe the US approach is the realistic given the constraints, but I think the constraints are not reasonable. You cannot think of doing this and not put the money where you need it.
What was the country in which football was invented? Anyone? England? Of course not. Many cultures for thousands of years kicked round objects. They kicked balls. But it was England that regulated the game. It standardized a sort of game and created the rules that created legitimacy for many, many people to accept those rules and engage in a competitive play. Standardization and regulation are crucial. So although I'm an economic geographer and I often take the business view and the entrepreneurial view, you still need, on the one hand, social acceptance and legitimacy across, on the international ground, not only in Europe, but around the world. And regulators exactly do that service. They open the field for anticipation of the rules, also for the investments. So I think regulation is absolutely necessary. It's also like when you think of the modern e-bike, okay, the bicycle that uses an electronic engine. It all started in Japan, and there were hundreds of solutions. Some were like motor vehicles running 100 kilometers. How would you deal with them? But it was regulation that standardized that an e-bike is a vehicle that requires human power that is augmented by a motor, and only then it's an e-bike, and this makes it possible to integrate it into the traffic. So 2 examples just to illustrate how important regulation is. The European Union, I would be interested to hear your opinion, but I increasingly hear that Europe has become global leader in regulation because we are so restrictive in many regards. The data protection, general data protection agreement and many other things. So there needs to be more dialogue, as you say, about the real challenges that there are, not the exaggerated ones. And there needs to be an international ground for regulation. The fact that the 4 leading AI corporations, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, and Anthropic, just created a forum to self-regulate AI is a good sign, but it's also a trick to avoid the government coming in the game. But I think that is necessary.
I would certainly agree that the question is not between regulation or no regulation, but it's about the question is about the right type of regulation to support deployment and advancement of this technology. you referred to Europe as a leader in regulation, and I'm not necessarily sure that that is something I would be proud of as an American policymaker, because in our view, some of the requirements, for instance, of data protection, data compliance that are imposed upon European SMEs are so costly that it just doesn't enable them to compete successfully in the digital economy. So, but yeah, certainly there are appropriate policy issues to address the intellectual property issues, how to address deep fakes. But I guess maybe 2 points here. One, we talk about generative AI. It's been around for over a decade. And Europeans have been working on the AI Act for at least 5 years now. But just last month, there was a panicked attempt to get generative AI into the AI Act as a high-risk technology, right? So the point I'm trying to make there is we also need to educate policymakers to understand the impact of these technologies. Otherwise, we're going to end up with some very poor regulations. And listen, I do think, in America, what we have tried to advance is a principle of algorithmic accountability, which states that an algorithmic system should employ a variety of controls to ensure the operator can verify it acts in accordance with its intentions, as well as identify and rectify harmful outcomes. So I think, yes, in America, we have had a view that, industry-led conformity can be adequate as opposed to external government regulation of the sector.
Yeah. So the question is not regulation or not, regulate or not. It's rather when to regulate. And I am a little bit afraid of that to regulate these technologies in the time of the panic, in the time of the hype, is maybe not the right point to regulate.
I think what you were trying to say is that in Europe we have a tendency to say, I will create the law to make sure that the perception is that you know what you're talking about and you did your duty, but it doesn't have anything to do with the principle of regulation, which, it's more in the substance.
Yeah, but when you look a little bit in the global perspective, that we can see that Europe positions itself as a regulatory power. It's a very strange term anyway. Why not, I would say, as an AI power or power in some technologies? And may I widen a little bit of our perspective to a geopolitical level? I know that you will listen to many geopolitical discussions during these 2 days and so on. But I'm really convinced that the basic question of geopolitics today is who will dominate the future technology. When we really think that AI is a general purpose technology for the next 100 years or till the end of the century, the basic question is who dominates this technology will dominate many things. Yeah? So I think that geopolitics is strongly driven also by this race for the new technologies. And it is for the big players, yeah? For US, for China, and so on. But we are living here in Central and Eastern Europe, so here in Esztergom. And my basic question is, what do you think about this geopolitical rivalry, which is on the agenda, on the political agenda, one first. And the second, what role could play Central and Eastern Europe in this whole issue when there is a big rivalry, let's say, US and China and so on. Europe or European Union as a regulatory power, and we live here in Central and Eastern Europe, where we have really very strong drive to catch up once with the most developed countries. Very difficult question, anyway.
Well, I think, first of all, I don't agree with the premise that it's all about US and China as leaders and everybody else needs to kind of find a way. I think certainly the US is leading in all aspects, the technology, the finance, it's the reserve currency, so it's incredibly well placed. And China has done a lot of groundwork, but not being a free society and having its own issues lately, I think actually India is a significantly more interesting emerging power in that technology because it has scale, it has real competition, and it has talent. So if anything, it's going to be US against somebody, which I guess we all seem to agree it's not quite Europe. But the implementation of the technology is more important because it is going to regulate happiness, productivity, distribution of wealth, and things like this. So I think Central Europe can certainly do very well in the adoption process, which is as big or even bigger, frankly, than the innovation itself.
You said a difficult question. So I remember a book that a German business person wrote on the Silicon Valley. What is so different in the Silicon Valley from Germany? And in the foreword, he justifies why he got interested in that question. And he said, the last really innovative thing that met the global economy and originated in Germany was the software company SAP. Okay? Too big to fail, well established. And that company is as old as I am, 50 years. So in the last 50 years, half a century, nothing new came from Germany on these new technologies. And Germany is the biggest economy, the most resilient economy in this European Union. So you see where that gets. My response is not so super positive regarding the role of Europe in this. But your question was also regarding Central and Eastern Europe. And we see that also compared with Western European countries, that the human resources, the skills in mathematics and engineering and the hard sciences are excellent in this region. And we've seen that many European businesses are tapping into this pool of talent. So for the future development of the technologies and better AI, you certainly need brilliant brains. And that's what the US do. They attract the brains from all over the world to be the location for the innovation. But it's not the Americans, it's a global community of very talented and gifted people who collaborate on those projects. So this would be the thing to do. But in terms of developing the technologies behind that, the training data, the infrastructure, the computing centers, these are all subject to economies of scale. And I think the race regarding that is somehow lost in Europe, I would say.
Yeah, if I were to give advice to European policymakers of any European country, it would be to set yourself out as an innovation superpower, not a regulatory superpower. There was a great study done by McKinsey called How to Compete and Grow, which looks at what drives economic growth in countries across the world. And is it really done by changing the compositional mix of industries in your economy or maximizing the productivity of your existing industries? So the first part refers to replacing a call center with a semiconductor fab. And the second part refers to making your manufacturing or your agriculture industry more productive. They found that 80% of growth comes from adopting modern technologies to make a country's existing mix of industries more productive and capture more market share. So that'd be number one. But point two, the other 20%, the startups matter. And 25% of Hungarian startups, as I understand, in the past years, have moved to other countries where there is a more manageable legal and regulatory environment. So for Hungary specifically, I would ask, how do we make ourselves the flashpoint for entrepreneurship and innovation in tech industries in Central and Eastern Europe, and go about everything that has to happen to make that ecosystem happen? That includes things like tax credits, education, training, making it easy to start a business, understanding how you manage equity and tax during payouts. But there's a tremendous role for Central and Eastern European in this economy. And then I would say more broadly, we do frame it as a debate between US and China, but that's not really it. The global flashpoint isn't between those two countries. It's between those two systems. And it's a liberal, democratic, international order of which the United States should regard its key European allies as advocates for perpetuating that system versus one that is, by definition, totalitarian and autocratic.
I would have one more aspect. When you look back the last 100 years, who were the sources of great new base technologies? The US, Japan, and Germany. They were leading the board. And among the three countries, Germany was always the country that was least able to commercialize their technologies into markets. So we've talked about the supply, like the skills and the technology behind that and the capital to develop it. But again, part of the innovation is always who understands the needs and who creates the markets, and so that globally markets are receptive to the kinds of solutions. And that will be a question that also requires creativity and may open new opportunities also for different locations. When I think of the role of Estonia in e-government and the familiarization with digital technologies, that is certainly, you know, more a peripheral place that nobody had really on mind. Or when I think of the canton in Switzerland of Zug becoming the European spearhead of the crypto economy, where they change laws and create institutions for Bitcoin to become just a regular currency. When you look to Slovenia, Ljubljana, one of the globally most friendly environments for new technologies. So all these aspects of legitimacy and exception are also important, and that, you know, has geographical promises ahead.
Yep, thank you very much. I do think that the basic question in that case, where we are in the development of one technology. Are we in the discovery phase, where entrepreneurs and talent, etc., are crucially important? Or are we in the implementation phase, where everything what you said, that to understand the needs of the people and so on, how to implement it? And in that case, unfortunately, we don't know exactly where we are now. Let's say Hungary and Central and Eastern Europe are better chances when we are in the phase of the implementation of these technologies. And US are maybe in much more better place when it is all about the discovery. And I am very uncertain where we are, and I would say we are all very uncertain on a very high level. And yeah, just one point what Stephen, you mentioned, the entrepreneurship and also the education of entrepreneurship. We are at the MCC now trying to do this because unfortunately at universities there are not really strong these courses, and because that is something also you should learn. You can learn by doing, yeah, that is also, but also learn at a university. So as far as I see that not just the technologies are developing exponentially, but also our time is running out nearly exponentially. But I do think that maybe later on we can follow this discussion. So thank you very much, Raffaella, Stephen, and Johannes for this discussion. I wouldn't say that we have solved everything. Maybe we raised many questions that we can think later on. And when you are really creative, you can maybe have good ideas and good conclusions from this discussion. So thank you very much to be here in Estonia. And we were in the ship.